Hello, I'm Matt Yonkovit, head of open source strategy, or the HOS for short, and you are watching the Cloud Therapist channel.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist Shorts. I'm Richard Simon. Today we are doing a top 5 predictions in open source for 2023. I have with me Matt Yonkovit. Matt is the head of open source strategy, also known as the HOS, at Scarf. So let's get going without any further delay and just say hello to Matt. Hello, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Richard. Thank you for having me on.
Excellent. Well, pleasure to have you on. We've kind of been in touch a few times, you and I saw you last year at the Data on Kubernetes community event in London. So yeah, great really to have you back on again to have this chat. So Matt, let's dive straight into your top 5, because I think we've got some interesting points that you wanted to make. So go ahead.
Absolutely. So my top 5 predictions, I figured I'm going to go big because I don't want to go small. So we're going to go big with some of these bold predictions for this year.
Brilliant.
And the first one is everyone is all about security. Everyone is all worried about the supply chain in the open source software space. And so there is a lot of talk about curated repositories, which in another word is just another distribution. And so you know what we're going to get? We're going to get someone who's going to launch something called a curated, repository that turns into just another distribution of Linux. It's going to be something out there that's going to have everything you need in it that is quote unquote curated and safe for consumption.
Right. Excellent. So do you think that's going to come from like a vendor or maybe one of the hyperscaler cloud providers? What's your prediction?
Probably all of the above. We'll probably see several of them because Google has already announced they're looking at how they can do the curated software.
Right.
We know that Amazon can't be far behind. They'll want you to, use their Amazon Linux. They'll probably put something in there to secure their repositories and say, this is the curated list.
Right. Excellent. Okay. What's next on your list?
So number 2, we're going to start to see, and we already have started to see, the funding for open source companies start to dry up. Okay. Because right now the economy's kind of turned and there's this thought process around, are we getting the ROI out of a lot of the companies that are out there? And a lot of the startups, especially over the last few years, have not generated sufficient enough revenue for the investment. And that's going to hurt the economy and all startups as a whole. But I think it's also going to trickle down into the open source space. Okay. And that's going to lead to a few other things, right? So we're going to see some consolidations. We're going to see some mergers. Maybe a few open source projects will go away. And if you look right now, there's a pretty broad landscape. Look at the CNCF map.
I was just going to mention that.
Oh my gosh. It's so large, right? Richard, it's so big. Like you're like, oh, wait a minute. Each one of these does the same thing, kind of?
I know.
So we're going to see some consolidation there.
Yeah, right? Whenever I want to scare my customers, I do a screenshot of the landscape and I put that up in one of my slides. So
yes. Yeah, pick one, right?
Yeah,
so I think that we're going to start to see some consolidation. A few projects are going to merge. We're going to see that open source funding dry up. And as some of these projects or these companies that are the sole owners of this open source, you're going to find that there's some enterprises that are really concerned about this. And they're going to look at this and say like, you know what? How do we support this now that they've gone away?
That's right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. What's next on your list?
Number 3, you know what? Who doesn't love a good chat about AI and chat GTP, right? We all do. And you know what? It's going to have a profound impact on the open source space. In fact, my bold prediction is that someone this year is going to announce that chat GTP or some other AI is the #1 contributor of an open source project. So someone is going to use it to contribute code and they're going to get them to the top of the list and they're going to announce it and the world will lose its mind.
So all those, all those instructions and bits of code that people want to write are going to be kind of getting automated and being written by an AI for us. That's cool.
Hey, it's going to happen. Someone's going to try it. Someone's going to push it through. Maybe it won't work so well. And there'll be a lot of people who will be really upset when they get a lot of crappy code pushed to their repositories.
I did hear, this is just an anecdotal note, I did hear that somebody had written something which actually can detect whether the the text that's been kind of published in an article or something was actually written by an AI or not. So maybe we'll have an equivalent of that for code as well. So you never know.
I wonder if any of my written stuff that I don't use an AI for will come back as written by an AI, right? Like, I wonder if that will happen. False positive.
Yeah, the false positive stuff. Yeah, that will be really interesting. It's gonna. Yeah. I agree with you. I think that for this year, that's going to be a really interesting one to look out for, definitely. Okay, what's next on your list?
So I think that we are going to see an open source cloud standard for running open source as a service. So some sort of organization, rules, guidebooks, whatever. There's been a long history of open source projects pointing the finger over at the cloud provider saying, like, you're stealing our stuff, you're strip mining us. And we're going to see some new efforts around trying to prevent that, but also making sure that it's just fair to play for everyone. And I think that that can lead to some really good things because it allows some maybe portability between cloud providers, provided that everyone is using that same open source standard.
Right. Okay. So how was that kind of, how do you think that's going to kind of play out? What's the sort of, give me some sort of ideas of, how's that kind of practically going to work out then?
Well, I think that we've already started to see some of this around, different technologies. For instance, like, Kubernetes, people are trying to say, oh, we're going to go Kubernetes. We're going to have the operators, and we have operators that should be able to run on different, platforms. But I think what we'll start to see is, some fundamental changes on what should be run in each of the cloud providers, how it should be run, and maybe some protections for those who are running on each of the cloud providers. Because right now, again, as the economy turns, a lot of people are looking to cut costs. And as they do that, if they want to move cloud providers, maybe move things on-prem, maybe move things to that cloud native environment, they're finding that portability isn't necessarily there. And I think that's going to drive it.
Right. Excellent. Okay. So that was number 4, I think.
Number 4. Yes.
Yeah. And what's your 5?
Number 5. Okay. And this has already been happening, but we're going to see an acceleration, and more people take note of this, is big companies will continue to try and control and own what open source is, right? Trying to redefine what the next wave is of open source and what is acceptable and what isn't. We've already seen some erosion of that when you talk about things like open source licensing, or you talk about projects where they come out and they say, like, oh, we were open source, now we are sort of open source, we're source available, we're these other licenses, we're these other things, but it's just good enough. Or this is open source compatible. Right? A lot of software, especially in those cloud providers, are quote unquote open source compatible. Yeah. And so we're starting to see the words start to merge over one another and overlap. And it's really confusing for people. And I think we're going to see bigger companies try and take ownership roles and try and steer the ship in a direction that is maybe a little bit more advantageous to themselves.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the kind of the involvement of enterprises, in that sort of space is going to probably drive a lot of the demand and the type of requirements. We've kind of been quite geeky about sort of features and playing around in our communities and releasing all this stuff. That's kind of mainly out of interest for us, but I'd certainly like to see enterprises kind of being a little bit more involved in that and kind of coming up with the features and benefits for future projects.
Yeah.
Cool.
Indeed.
Cool. All right. So that's your kind of top 5. Now, do we have any other ones that are sort of interest that you're kind of looking at the moment? Any other?
Oh, well, from an open source perspective, maybe not. I mean, I think that with some of these, though, there are some things that trickle out.
Right.
So, for instance, the idea on how you monetize or commercialize open source is as relevant as ever, especially in a downturn economy. Right. There has been this growth at all cost mentality within the industry for several years, where it is, you're going to spend every dollar you make and $100 you didn't make, but you're going to borrow in order to grow your user base. And eventually that will turn into something. Now we're going to see much more discipline in the, this is what it takes to manage a business. And that means we're going to see what sort of metrics people are looking at. You're going to see more discussions around what sort of business models make sense. How do we get people, maybe contributors to get paid for their open source? These are the things that are going to be top of mind for a lot of us.
Right. Interesting. So probably a bonus from me, and this is anecdotal and kind of quite interesting, is somebody, I saw a LinkedIn post, somebody asked ChatGPT, what's kind of the next big thing in DevOps? And the answer from ChatGPT was GitOps. So I'm wondering, Matt, whether you agree with ChatGPT on that.
Well, yeah. So this is where it's interesting. So when we talk about like Git and we talk about, the open source space, we make the assumption that many of us who talk in the space are very, Git centric, but
Yeah.
most of the users of open source are downloading packages that are already pre-built, and they never even actually look at the source.
Right.
So there is a split, but from a
Yeah.
developer perspective, especially at the companies that are contributing to open source, GitOps is a requirement, especially when we're starting to look at the merger and the consolidation of a lot of these projects. We're not talking about, having a project that is self-contained now. We're talking about
Yeah.
a project that has 50 other projects that are requirements.
Yeah.
And how do you move those all in? And how do you make sure that they're built together and that the code is contributed and that you're pulling things at the right place at the right time and you're contributing upstream when you need to?
Sure. Well, thank you for that, Matt. I think that was really interesting. I think maybe we can do another talk at the end of the year and kind of look back and see what
Absolutely.
happened. That'll
Absolutely.
be quite cool to do. Okay, so yeah, I really appreciate you. That was very interesting. Appreciate your insights into open source predictions for this year. I will provide some links in the description of the video. So Matt has a podcast called the Hacking Open Source Business Podcast. But Matt, you also had another announcement for us.
Yes, actually, we are launching a new community called the Open Source Metrics community. So we're focused on a lot of open source business metrics. How do we get people who are not only interested in the projects, but help them build a established commercial relationship? So we have a new website that's launching called opensourcemetrics.org. And you can take a look, and I go through the 23 metrics that I think all businesses or projects that are trying to move to a commercial open source philosophy should be following. And so there's videos there. There's going to be descriptions on all the different metrics and all the things you should be tracking. And we hope to build a community around that.
Fantastic. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this talk, please subscribe to the channel and smash the like button. See you next time.